All right, we are live. We should be live at least, inshallah. أعوذ بالله
Yes,
من
we're
الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We begin in the name of Allah, the most gracious and most merciful, and peace be upon His last and final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're here today to discuss the historical and critical analysis of the Old Testament. No, I will not be giving a presentation. That will be done by a beautiful brother Faisal. He will be talking about the Hebrew texts of the Old Testament, getting into the nitty-gritty of the historical construction of the Old Testament. And we then, after the presentation is done, but depending on whether we get to the Hebrew or the non-Hebrew slides, we will allow people to come up and discuss the presentation or topics about Islam. I am Brother DeAndre, the owner of Das Connected to Islam, and with me are my beautiful guests, Brother Ali and Brother Faisal. Brother Faisal, it's amazing to have both of you brothers on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh to all of you guys in the chat. And to all the non-Muslims, peace and respect. Let's have some good discussions, inshallah ta'ala. I hand it over to y'all.
He he was almost there. He was almost
wa
there.
wa alaikum
Wa alaikum
assalam.
salam, brother. He was almost
Shit.
there.
Yes. Okay, that's good. Jazakallah khair, akhi.
Just like,
This
I
is
had to throw that in. Come on, Ali. It was too tempting for me to resist.
Yeah,
yeah,
he took it.
it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. So let's give it about 5 minutes or so for people to just come up. I know we sort of started a bit about 15 minutes late, but hopefully we'll be able to ramp up and go through a lot of the presentation today. I'm planning to go through the Hebrew text or the Hebrew sources today, definitely. The non-Hebrew sources, we'll see how much time it takes, and then we'll either continue or if needed, we'll just continue on this next weekend, inshallah, right? To be honest, there's a lot of ground to cover. So it's going to be a series, as I initially informed everybody, just because there's so much that needs to be discussed here. Most of what we're doing is just presenting things as is so far. We've not gone into any of the any opinions here. We're not talking about our own perspective. We're not talking about the Islamic perspective right now. At this point in time, we're just discussing what is there, what are these people working with, and what are the sources that they use. Then we'll start going into some of the ways in which they look into the text and primarily focus on the textual criticism aspect of it. And then finally, the Islamic aspect of it, of why, as Muslims, we don't need to consider ourselves much with this particular form of study. And certain aspects of which are completely irrelevant to the Islamic texts, and the other aspects which make sense that we should go into it. We can probably do some study on it, but overall, how useful is it going to be? We'll probably have to determine that. Okay. So let me bring up the slides and let's see. Okay. So as we talked about this is the biblical sources and textual criticism of the Old Testament that we will be discussing, right? I'll just go over quickly on the table of contents. We talked about the Old Testament in our last, in our previous presentation, and we discussed a bit about the history of the Old Testament, right? So we covered those two in our previous presentation. Today, we're going to hopefully be able to cover the sources of the Old Testament, both of them. But at the very least, the Hebrew sources, I'm hoping that we're able to make our audience familiar with the Hebrew sources of the Old Testament, where they're coming from, and what is new in this field, essentially, right? So, what is criticism of the Old Testament and the other parts? We'll cover it in our later slides, right? Um, just going over very quickly, right? We went over how the Old Testament is structured, how there are different books in the Old Testament, and how Catholics and Orthodox have certain books which are disputed by other Christian denominations. And at the same time, there are specific books which are, for example, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in other sources as well that we have, which some consider as part of the the Old Testament, right, or the scriptures, but other Christian denominations or even Jewish denominations don't consider it as canonical. Plus, we've got references that are there in uh, the New Testament or by church fathers, which talk about certain books which we no longer have, or which are books which are either in the Catholic Bible or in the Orthodox Bible. But essentially, those were what we talked about in our previous one. So when we talk about the Old Testament, what does it actually mean? It could mean many things to many different people. And that's why it's not so easy to pin down exactly what it is. Um, we talked about the history of the Old Testament when it was written, the Jewish history. I'm not going to go over it again, but I would recommend if anybody wants a refresher, go to the previous presentation. But at the same time, we talked almost the 3,400 years of Jewish history from all the way from the time of Musa alayhi salam coming onto this earth, going through his struggles and bringing the people of Israel out of Egypt and into the land of what we today is known as Palestine, and establishing a Islamic society over there, right? And how during that time he got the revelation from Allah, the Sharia was established, and um, how that Sharia was, how different times during those few centuries, the struggles of the Jewish people and the social political situation which they went through, which impact what happened in the Old Testament, right? Then we talked about how the Old Testament itself um, stands witness to how the text had changed, and there were attempts to by different kings and priests to uh, make sure that the text was reinstated, right? Then in the end, we also saw how Ezra brought in some reforms, and we have the Old Testament as it is today. So let's go over the sources of the Old Testament, the Jewish Torah, right? And this would discuss the different sources in Hebrew and non-Hebrew. Now, it's important for us to understand what, when the academics are talking about ancient history, right, what they mean. Ancient for them doesn't mean it's before the birth of Isa alayhi salam, before the birth of Jesus Christ, according to them. So they don't mean by ancient, if you're thinking that they're talking about something uh, before 2000 years ago, that's actually not true. Ancient can be something from the 1400s. Ancient can be something from uh, the 10th century. Ancient can be something from the 4th century. And ancient can be something from any time in the BC, 3,400 years ago, 2,400 years ago, 2,000 years ago. All right. So what is it that we have right now? So let's look at the Hebrew manuscripts that we have. So there's there's actually two types of Hebrew text right now that we have when we're talking about ancient Hebrew manuscripts. We have the historical text and we have the Masoretic text. The historical text is what was used by the Jews, and it's nowadays called the consonantal Hebrew text. And this was in use before and up to around the time of Isa alayhis salam. Okay, most of the text was preserved through oral traditions of the Hebrew Bible because the oral traditions were still strong, although it was dying out. The Hebrew was a dying language at that time. So around 1 century BCE, Hebrew uh, was no longer a spoken language per se, even though it was preserved as a written language, as a written text, and through rabbinic literature, but it was no longer a common language for the Jews. The Jews by that time had switched to primarily Aramaic, also Syriac Aramaic, and some sects of the Jews, or particularly the Christians and the Christian Jews, were using Greek um, as a text. And the Christians, when they split off, one of the big reasons for the split was the use of the language itself. So Christianity predominantly saw the Greek language as its primary source of transmitting the text, whereas the Jews, because of this shift in use of the Greek text by the Christians, uh, moved away from Greek and tried to go back to either the Hebrew, but primarily the Aramaic text that was there, right? Then at that time, or up to that time, people were still aware of the correct pronunciation and interpretation of the text, right? Although in the early 2nd century BCE, as we would later see, right, Hebrew was sort of dying out as a language, as the common language for the Jews, with a lot of the Jews starting to use Aramaic and some of the other languages in and around that time, either Greek, Aramaic, Syriac. Some were using Arabic, as we know, and so on. The other ancient manuscripts that we have are the Masoretic text. Okay, this is the standard text that is used now today for the Hebrew Bible, and it's considered by many to be the most reliable representation of the original Hebrew Bible. Okay, how do they arrive at that conclusion? Since they don't have the original Hebrew Bible, we don't know. But essentially, with what they have, they think that this is the best representation of that text. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about some of the groups that were working on the preservation of the text. Now, remember that when it comes to the Bible was no longer, or it was never a common book among the uh, among the Jews, right? So we're not talking about modern societies where the printing press is common, um, the copies of the Bible are being distributed around the world, or like we have with the Quran, there's every Muslim has learned some of the Quran, even though they cannot afford a copy, but they've learned some of the Quran to be able to recite it during Salah, right? None of that was present with the Jewish, um, among the Jewish traditions as such. And what we have is the Bible was predominantly a text controlled by the kings and the priests and the elite in the society. Okay, so the um, the current Hebrew Old Testament that we have is the Masoretic text, and it's named after the Masoretes, who were Jewish scholars, right? And these scholars worked between the 6th century CE, sorry, it's actually 6th century CE to the 10th century CE. All right. These scholars, they it, their main purpose behind this was an attempt to uh, reinstate the Hebrew text, because the Hebrew text was sort of, by this time the Hebrew text was sort of lost. Greek, Greek and Aramaic was the primary language in which the Bible was being communicated. The Old Testament was being communicated to the people, right? So they made an attempt to put all of this back together into a Hebrew text, right? And we'll talk more about them later. The other group, which came before them, and there were some of the groups in the middle as well, but the Sopherim are the other ones that we're going to talk about. There were a group of Jewish scribes and scholars who were responsible for copy and preservation of the Hebrew scriptures from the days of Ezra in the 5th century BC, who we talked about earlier in our previous um, presentation. So Ezra, as we discussed before, he was the one who made the reading of the Torah um, common again with the Jews, because people no longer understood the Torah. So he started certain rituals wherein Torah was being read openly to the people and so on. And he started some processes which were carried on, and these Sopherim were sort of the people who claimed to be the ones who kept on that tradition, the traditions which Ezra started. Okay, so these people were the ones who were responsible for the vocalization and cantillation that is used in the Masoretic text today. However, we do need to understand that some of the sophrems between the days of Ezra and the time of Isa al-Islam, right, they took liberties with the Hebrew text. They made textual changes. So there's all of that that can be seen in the text, that the extant copy. Extant means copies that have survived today that can be uh, referred to, used, or analyzed to determine what was it that people back in those days were reading, writing, or using. All right. So uh, the Sopherim, they were making changes in the text, since and we're just talking about the 500 years when the Jews were relatively more in a much more politically um, is less um, difficult position, so to speaking. Remember, we talked about the two times that the Jews were uh, driven out of their land and pretty much exiled. The first time by the Assyrians, the second time by the um, Babylonians.
Babylonian.
Yeah. So this is at this time between the 5th century BCE all the way to the 1st century AD. The Jews are not going to be driven out until 70 AD, right? Up to this point, they're still surviving in that land. They're still given a bit of religious freedom to practice their own faith. And the Greek and the Roman empires, primarily, who were responsible for them, and also as we talked about it earlier on, the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire that was ruling them, they allowed them somewhat the religious freedom to practice their own faith, right? And in this time, we're seeing that these changes were being made by the Sopherim. Okay, let's let's move on. Okay, now what's happening prior to 300 BCE? So let's see. The textual transmission of the Hebrew text prior to 300 BCE is pretty complex because of the challenge that a lot of scholars have with finding um, data that can be analyzed, manuscripts that can be analyzed, or any other form of a point of reference that can be used, right? So we don't know much of what really happened at that time. Okay, it's just there's a lot of speculation about what might be happening, but there's unless people find some sort of document on that contains the Old Testament writings, or any scrolls, or any other sort of evidence, right? It's still unclear what was the means of transmission. Now we may find one or two texts here and there, but like we saw with the Dead Sea Scrolls, you cannot really say for sure if these are all um, eh, canonical, can be traced back to the original or not. Because even with the Dead Sea Scroll, we've seen there's so many books, complete books, or not complete books, but essentially books that whatever information we have of those books are not included in the Old Testament, right? So one of the key factors, right, in understanding the textual transmission is that texts were transmitted orally around that time. It was primarily transmitted orally, and then text was being written down as well. But the primary form of transmission was oral, because you could not everybody could read and write, not everybody could make a copy. So the primary form of communication of the Old Testament was oral transmission, right? And this oral tradition that was made was being passed down generation to generation. So you may know of the some of the verses of the scripture that you would pass down to your children, your students, your family members, right? And then your family members continue that tradition, and so on. Okay. Now, this oral tradition did become an important factor in the preservation as well, because at times some people would note down this oral tradition later on. Okay. So for example, you may know some of the text. Okay. Let's if I want to give an example from the Quran, let's say one of us here knows the Surah Fatiha. So we recite Surah Fatiha, teach it to our kids. Our kids learn it. They teach it to their kids, and so on and so forth. And then let's say in the fourth generation after me, my progeny decides, okay, I'm actually going to write this down. And that's how a lot of this text ended up being recorded. Because we don't have the oral traditions that can be traced back. There was no chain of transmission per se, which we have in Islam. So it's not possible to trace back all of the oral traditions to what it was, unless it had been written down. Okay. Now, one of the problems with the oral transmission is variations, errors, right? They creep in. So these variation and errors can be because of number of factors, because over time language changes, over time pronunciation changes, over time people who used to write um, who were used to writing words like he laughed are now writing lol, and so on. So that just is one of the examples of how language can evolve over time, right? And new words can enter into certain languages and replace old words that were being used, right? So these type of things, as they happened, they impacted how these traditions were being transferred. Because when with a lot of oral traditions, at times what happens is not only is the tradition transmitted, but the understanding of the tradition is also transmitted over. Um, in addition to that, it's also likely that scribes and editors made changes to these texts, right? So we have all of these challenges happening prior to 300 BCE. And why is the 300 BCE sort of an important date? We'll get to see that very soon, right? But the 300 BCE date or the third century BCE date is sort of a rough anchor that we put in, giving them giving them a generous um, eh, 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 sort of being very generous with the dates that they have, right? As we will come to see in our next few slides very soon. Okay, let's move on. So the textual transmission prior to 300, again, if the one of the things that we need to accept is regardless of how what type of transmission it was, how acceptable it is still considered a valid form of transmission of the Hebrew text if it has been written down and it can be analyzed. And if there is enough evidence from other similar sort of writings that maybe like 20 different sources can be looked at and said, okay, they're within a reasonable variance of what one is saying and the other is saying, right? That the meaning is the same, the understanding is the same, right? And if you the interpretation is the same, right, then you can arrive at a conclusion that the text might be what the original text might be as it was being understood by the people of that time and place, right? These written copies um, are the written copies that we have. They are sort of used in conjunction with the oral transmissions and those oral traditions that we had that were being preserved to give more credence to or a better understanding of what the original text might be. So, in summary, again, the Hebrew texts, textual transmission, and the oral transmission was a complex process, both oral and written transmission of the text. The oral tradition of the Hebrew was likely an important factor in preserving the text and ensuring their accuracy, but variation and errors are part of it. Okay. And additionally, the texts were written down on a variety of material, which may have introduced errors and variation into the text. As we know, certain material like papyrus, leather, um, these can they can um, wear away much more easily than other material, and so all of those factors are taken into account when we're doing this. Now, remember, we're talking about the sources, and we're trying to understand the type of sources that are used to put the Old Testament together. And this is what we have. So let's take a look at what we have from the third century BCE. Now, a lot of people are probably aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I've just included some pictures for people to understand what these scrolls are like. So some of these scrolls, if you see on the top right, that's how some of the scrolls look like. Bottom left, another copy. These are some of the jars and type of containers in which these scrolls were being preserved. A copy of some of the, not the exact caves, but what some of these caves and what the locality looks like where these places, these documents were found. All right. Okay. So these Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1940s. Right. They were, most of them were written between the second century or to the first century BC, and some, if you're being generous, you can basically say this is the third century BCE. That's how far back they go. Right. So even if we are being generous and we say it goes back all the way to the 3rd century BCE, right? Then um, that sort of is the earliest that Old Testament um, uh, extant manuscripts can be found, right? These are found in the caves in the vicinity of the Dead Sea in Palestine, right? And they contain most of the fragments that we found. They found are in Hebrew, but there were some in Aramaic and Greek as well. Okay, some of the scrolls that they found were in Aramaic and Greek. Um, there's almost all of the books of the Hebrew Bible that they found. Plus, as we talked about it in our previous presentation, that there's also some books of the Old Testament which are not. Sorry, there are books that are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls which are not included in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Bible of the Jews, right? So the other name for the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, is the Qumran Scrolls. So if you've seen anybody use the Qumran Scrolls, if and you hear anyone talking about that, that's the Dead Sea Scrolls that they're talking about. Okay, so who? So many of the DSS scholars, they point out that the authors of the scroll were the Essenes, right? But again, this is all disputed. Okay, so Essenes were a Jewish sect mentioned in many of the writings in the 1st century CE. And again, there are alternative theories that have come up. None of them are conclusive because it's very difficult to establish um, with certainty who are the actual writers of the Dead Sea Scroll. Okay, so the other theories are that these were early Christians, and some claims they weren't even Jews, right? There's actually a Qumran sect theory, which is the name given to them. It not necessarily they might not necessarily call themselves Qumran sect or anything, but it's a name given to this sect, which basically represents an isolated Jewish sect that was surviving in these caves, right? And they were just trying to protect themselves by staying out of the general Jewish population's way. There's also the idea that these texts originated in Jerusalem, and that when the Romans attacked and the revolt happened, that some of the Jews took these scrolls from Jerusalem to hide them in these caves just to protect the original documents. Now we don't know which of these is can be held true. I mean, these are all speculation from the academics right now. But what we do know is that these scrolls, they're written in on different material, including animal skin, papyrus, copper, bronze, and there are different scripts found, including the Paleo Hebrew, Square Aramaic, and Greek. We do know that there are certain books which are not part of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and we know that uh, uh, that and we have some form of evidence of what was being read and considered as the Old Testament around the time, especially around the time when Isa al-Islam was there. Right. Akhwan, do you have anything to add or any questions or any observations? DeAndre or Ali?
I'll say this. Now, when you mention about the scrolls, as far as the Quran scrolls, I don't think a lot of Christians, or I don't think a lot of Christians really understand that it's not necessarily the same. So when we talk about texts, what is the earliest manuscript of the Old Testament?
Hmm.
Many Christians would say, well, it's the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
But you'd ask them, what does the Dead Sea Scrolls entail? And they would know, they will actually think it's the same, not realizing that it's not necessarily the same. It's not even just about the words that are being used. It's also the how many books were included. So
Yeah.
that's a that's something to take note of. And also, when we talk about the sorry, sorry about that. Also, when we're talking about the fourth century, the 300. Now, the whole millennium itself, the whole century itself, it's very, very important because why? There was somebody who decided somebody who decided to wake up one day and decide he wants to conquer the whole world, and that person was Alexander the Great. So when we talk about this idea of Greek influence, this opening of culture, there are a lot of events that's going on within the 300s. It ultimately the biggest catalyst of, sorry about that. The biggest catalyst of that would be Alexander the Great, because he was the one that, in a sense, that kind of connected Greek thinking to everywhere. Persia, India, Egypt, including Jerusalem as well. So it makes sense that a lot of issues will start around the early fourth century, going on the third, second, and first century as well.
Yeah. And that's interesting because when was Alexander the Great specifically? This is around 323 BC,
Yeah,
right?
Alexander the Great was born in 356, and 355, 356, and he was said to have died 323 BC. So the Greek Empire basically was at its peak around 323 BC.
Wow. I mean, a teenager uh, and a 20-year-old doing so much. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's
You're
yeah,
a 20-year-old as
tells me
well.
a lot about what I was doing in my life. I was like, wait a minute, well,
Exactly.
Alexander the Great at 16 years old was a general. I said, dang, I suck.
Yeah. And it just shows how much possibility there is if our youth stay away from video games and instead of conquering those video game worlds, they decide to conquer the real world.
Okay, okay,
They're
watch
perfectly
it,
able to
Akid.
do that.
Watch it, watch it, watch
Look,
it, watch
I'm an
it.
uncle. I'm an
You're on
uncle
thin
now.
ice.
I can say this. I'm an uncle now, right? I can say this, and chat would agree with me. I'll be honest with you. All right, let's move on because there's there's a lot of ground to cover. So I think I'm actually doing a good job so far of going through this fairly quickly. So let's see. So the Dead Sea Scrolls again, as we're talking about this, right? There's multiple theories of where they originated from, why the people who wrote them down decided to preserve them in the form and in the way that we currently see that they're preserving them. And there's a lot of speculation about how those sects, what happened to those sects, what happened to those people, why those got lost, and so on. So, but we can see from this that there was an attempt, at least in the face of some form of threat that was either real or perceived, that they wanted to make sure that some copies of their scripture in whatever form they had was preserved. Now, interestingly enough, not everything written in the Dead Sea Scroll is accepted as canon. And again, we also talked about how there are certain books in the Dead Sea Scroll which are not part of the, um, actually, not even part of the apocryphal text that we have today. So, a lot of questions, more questions than answers with what we have right now. And a lot of this is covered up by the Christian scholars. Most Christians, they are unaware of what all of this is about. They just trust the scholars to put together a book that they can read and call the Old Testament. Right. So let's continue. because there's a lot more on the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Oh, I actually missed this one. I should have done this before. No, I think I covered this. Did I? Yeah, I covered both. Okay. So the next thing, let's talk about the Masoretes. Okay, because as we talked about it before, that the current text of the Old Testament that we have, which is used by um, all Jews, almost all Jews right now, and most Christians, um, actually not most Christians, but most Protestant Christians, right? It can be traced back to the Masoretic text of the Jewish Bible. So, what was the Masoretic text? This was the text put together by the Masoretes, who were a group of Jews or Jewish scholars who spent a lot of time and effort in um, re rewriting the Jewish Bible in Hebrew and making sure that the text can be preserved in a format that can be read and used later on. So um, they worked from the 6th century to the 10th century, right? And the main reason, sort of, why this came about is because um, Hebrew was dying as a spoken language, right? So they needed some form of, or some way to make sure that the uh, text can be preserved. And remember, Hebrew is one of the only languages that, or only ancient language that has been successfully brought back, right? So we currently have, no matter how we look at it, but this is a fact that the Zionist movement was very successful in reestablishing um, Hebrew as a spoken language in modern times, right? So, what did the Masoretes do? The Masoretes, they not only did they work on the text, but they also added marks, which we call the Masorah, right? Which help with the correct pronunciation and interpretation of the text. So the Masorah aren't just the vowel signs. There's more than that, right? So we have the larger Masorah, which is found in the margin of the text. Okay. And these are like synonyms and list of variant readings or other annotations that the scribes found meaningful to, or added comments, their own comments to the text to make sure that people can understand it, the text. We also had the smaller Masorah, which consist of just the vowel points and the other marks that were added to the consonant text. And remember, when we talked about it, the historical consonantal text was the way that the text was being preserved. It's very similar to what we have with the Quran as well for our Muslim audiences, because the original transcript, the original Musaf that was put together by Uthman radiallahu anhu, right? It was just the consonantal skeletal text without the vowel signs on it, right? And the oral transmission preserved the tradition of how to read that text. Okay, so this is similar to what we're seeing here. Now remember, when this is happening, this is happening in the 6th century to the 10th century CE, right? So the Muslims and the Jews are sort of learning off each other. And this is the golden age of the Jews is during the Islamic Khilafah. When the Jews are under the Muslims, that's a time that they are thriving. That's a time they're learning, right? So they also developed the Midrash, which is the system which is currently used by the. It's also currently used by the Jews for interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. Okay. Okay, let's look at some of the Masoretic text that we have today. So the Aleppo Codex is the oldest Masoretic text that we have right now. It was produced in the 10th century CE. I do have a picture of the Aleppo Codex here, right? You can see markings on the side. You can also see notes at the top and so on. So this is a snapshot of the codex. It's a photo of the codex itself, right? And you can actually find the whole Aleppo Codex if you want to go online and download it. It can be downloaded as a PDF if you want to do that. It's in the traditional Hebrew text of the Jewish Bible, right? And most of it is on parchment. It's one of the most accurate and reliable copies of the Masoretic text. Also one of the oldest, right? The original copy that we had, it was damaged in a fire in the late 19th century. Okay, many pages were lost or stolen. However, they were able to rescue the remaining pages and they brought it back to Jerusalem, where this is now housed in the National Library of Israel. Okay. The next one that we have, the next Masoretic text, is the Leningrad Codex. Okay, it was produced in the 11th century. Okay, so it's currently in the it was produced in the city of Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg in Russia. Again, it's in the traditional Hebrew text of the Jewish Bible, a parchment manuscript as well. Again, one of the most accurate and reliable copies of the Masoretic text, and it's housed in the National Library of Russia. Now, over time, there were multiple copies and translations done of this text, although I'm not going to go into details of that. But it's important to understand that even those translations and interpretations at that time are considered as sources to do the interpretation of the Old Testament and which of the text to use, right? Now, when let's move on. Let's talk about one very interesting thing that we have. Now, Katef, Silver Scrolls, amulets. Now, this is, I just included this as an interesting piece of information. It's not necessarily used as a source of the Hebrew text, right? But it's a very interesting find and just helps in asserting the idea that the Old Testament definitely is a document which is older than the 3rd century manuscripts that we found in the Qumran cave, right? So this is it can be traced to around the 7th century or the early 6th century BC, right? Because what we've got written on it is and what we've got written on it is an early version of the Book of Numbers. All right, it was found near the Ketov Hinnom archaeological site near Old Jerusalem in 1979, but it was not really confirmed what it was. So what did they find? 2 silver scroll amulets that are currently the oldest extant documents with Torah on it. Okay. And it contains the priestly benediction, sort of a prayer. And if you know what an amulet is, some people call it taviz. I'm not sure if there's a word. Ali, do you have a word for amulets in your language, or something that you know is used in Africa? Okay.
The word that we typically use is the same word, amulet or
Okay.
amulet. So I don't. Yeah, as far as my tribal language, that one I would have to. Yeah, no, that one I would know.
Yeah. So this is like an amulet. So it does not have a full. It's not a full book. It's not a full copy. Just some of the verses from the Book of Numbers, right? And for a number of years, people didn't really know if this is um, uh, it's of biblical significance. But eventually, in 2004, some of the researchers in the University of Southern California, when they were re-examining these scrolls using some photographic and computer imaging techniques, they were able to fully read it and confirm that the text may be from the Book of Numbers, right? And it's because of the way it is written, the text, and uh, the language style and so on, they were able to determine that it's from a period before the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE, right? And before the destruction of the first temple, not the second temple. Okay. That's a couple of interesting things now, because this is now again some documents that are not used as source, but maybe we'll start hearing more about it. We heard Brother Wassam come on the channel and talk about this. That was an interesting story. So let's see, what are the Shapira Scrolls? The Shapira Scrolls, these were discovered by Moses Wilhelm Shapira in 1883. So this discovery is way before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Okay. Now, at that time, there wasn't this concept that, oh, you can actually find copies, ancient pre pre or BCE copies, right, of the Old Testament, because nobody had discovered the Dead Sea Scroll. So this was completely new. Okay. So these scrolls were written in Paleo Hebrew script, and it was consisting of just a handful of text, um, primarily from the Book of Deuteronomy. Okay. Uh, Shapira planned to sell these to the British Museum. Okay. However, the sale was called off because somebody who was sent to um, analyze these documents considered them as forgeries, and that was their conclusion. And Shapira was suspected of being the forger himself. So these manuscripts, they fell out of circulation. Nobody now knows where they are, and we don't even know if the fragments survived or not. Okay, because this is sort of a forgotten part of history. So there's recent work that is being done on, um, because Shapira's notes were sort of rediscovered, and when they went through it, they realized that Shapira was trying to decipher what was written on these texts, but uh, he was unsuccessful, or he only did this partially, right? And what they found in the notes differed from eh, what type of evidence they currently had on the scrolls that was maintained by the person who analyzed these scrolls. So let's see what happened. It's a pretty sad history, and we would see these two people, Shapira and the other guy, Ginsburg, David Ginsburg, who was sent to Christian David Ginsburg, who was sent to analyze the scrolls, and basically his determination was that these scrolls were forgeries. So again, 1883, when these scrolls were discovered, and we know it's in Paleo Hebrew script. Okay, these were sold to the British Museum, but the sale was called off, and we actually note that this doctor, sorry, that Christian David Ginsburg, when he did the analysis, his notes were faulty from whatever information we have from the scrolls. He was so there were some problem with those, and when David Ginsburg's notes were being analyzed against what Shapira's notes were, they there were questions that were being asked. Today, Dr. Aiden Dershowitz, he's putting together a book of what he has found in these scrolls when he's started digging into them. Although his analysis is not complete and it's still in review, right? We we have a sort of a hypothesis in place that these scrolls may be the oldest scrolls of the Old Testament that we have, and this has sort of renewed the interest that people have in these scrolls right now. So what has happened since then? Because modern techniques have changed, right? Um, it's allowed us to analyze these documents in better ways. Okay. At the same time, the uh, Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and the idea that something like the Old Testament copies can be found in archaeological sites like this, right? That was no longer a novelty, okay? Because when the original discovery was made, nothing like this was found before this. So these were sort of forgotten for history. Now, um, so the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries from the 46 to the 56, right? It developed a lot of new techniques as well, including carbon dating, textual and historical source criticism, etc., which allows for a much more stringent analysis of these documents. So, Dr. Aiden Dershowitz, who's a junior fellow at the Howard Society of Fellows and the chair of the Hebrew Bible and its exegesis at the University of Potsdam, he's come up with the new hypothesis where he's positing that these scrolls could be dated almost around 8th century BCE, and this would put it pretty much the oldest text that's there, right? Um, so this is almost 500 years before any known Hebrew or non-Hebrew text of the Bible is dated as of this time, right? Remember that when the last one we saw, the Kefim, the Katef Hinnom amulet, right? That's just an amulet. That's just like a piece of paper with some text written on it. It's not really useful as a source per se, right? Now, what this dating is based on, very little evidence, essentially. It's primarily based on what the script that is being used is, right? Including the copies of the original scrolls, the photos that were taken, and so on, right? And it's uh, it, it's not possible to do carbon dating because the original documents are not available as of this time. So, in his publication, Valediction of Moses, Dr. Aiden Dershowitz, he he's basically responds to a lot of the criticism that was posed on the Shapira Scrolls themselves, right? And why, and he basically positions that these should be taken as valid witnesses for the Old Testament. Okay, so it's really hopeful that these documents may become uh, may be used as new evidence and this may impact how the Old Testament is being written. Okay, as of now, they're not being used as witnesses. Now, why is this really interesting? The other reason why this is so interesting is because these scrolls, even though they contain writings from the book of Deuteronomy, right, and it's been written in the late Paleo Hebrew script, and we've dated based on the script, the textual variances are very revealing. And why do we want to talk about that? Because unlike the current sources that we have, like the Dead Sea Scroll, the Masoretic text, etc., These documents are written from the perspective of Moses, with pretty much a first person point of view, with several phrases being written as, and God said to me, unlike what we see in the Bible today, and God said to Moses, as opposed to what said by, it's pretty common in the Bible now, right? Also interesting is the absence of the tetragrammaton in most of the texts, okay, where it is used in the Hebrew text. Instead, actually, the phrase "the God, our God" is used, where a tetragrammaton is used in the Hebrew text. So instead of "our God Jehovah" or "Jehovah our God," right, the text in the Shapira scroll says "the God, our God." Okay, um, and certain passages are altogether missing, which will suggest that these were later addition to the text if the scrolls are to be accepted as valid. So this will be a really interesting addition to the witnesses of the Old Testament, and we'll talk about witnesses later on when we get to the textual criticism part. All right. Okay. All right. We're at the hour mark. I know this. Juan, do you want to just pitch in on what we have talked about so far? Because I'm just gonna summarize really. So right now, as we talked about this, right, uh, we've got sources of the Old Testament in Hebrew, and we've got sources of the Old Testament that are not in Hebrew. We've not covered the non-Hebrew one yet. We talked about what we have in Hebrew. We talked about how from the time of Ezra to the time later on, there were attempts to preserve the Old Testament, but the same people who were preserving it, they took liberties with the text, they made changes. Sometimes, and we will get more into the textual variances, where we will see what type of changes can be there. Those are sort of listed out. We'll talk about that later, right? But we saw that primarily what we have today is what has been preserved by the Masoretes, and it's called the Masoretic text. That's the current text of the um, Hebrew Bible, which is used by both the Jews and the Christian as the Old Testament, right? So at the same time, right, we saw how. Let me actually go back just very quickly. We saw how the text the different documents that we found, or the different witnesses. The technical term that they use is witnesses that we found, which are currently accepted as the oldest form of the text. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, right, are one of those witnesses. There, if we're being generous again, all the way back to the 3rd century BCE, up to the 1st century BCE, multiple scrolls written over this time, and we don't really know who it was, which group or which people in history preserved these, but we just know that these were preserved. They're available as fragments, not necessarily full books or full documents. Uh, some of it because of time, wear and tear, lost because of any other reason whatsoever, right? Maybe the ink is too smudged and cannot be read, and so on, right? But these form as a very useful um, witness to the Old Testament script, right? Then we did talk about the Masoretes and their codification of the Old Testament, which we currently have. Now, remember this: whenever it comes to what should go into the Bible, uh, most of the time, unless there's a valid reason, most of the time it is the Masoretic text which is taken as canon. right? And the other texts, including the non-Hebrew one, like the Septuagint and some of the other ones, right? They're not considered as the primary text. Okay, the Masoretic text is still considered as the primary text. Okay, and this goes back to what the purpose of putting together the Bible is. So there's a lot that we would have to discuss in that, and let's go ahead. Then we talked about the two extant manuscripts of the Old Testament, the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, right? These are the two Masoretic texts, the oldest Masoretic text that we have. We've got translations and copies of the Masoretic text out after that as well, which are used, but we didn't go deep into that. Then we talked about some interesting finds like the Kataf Hinnom silver scrolls, right? The Shapira Scrolls, which gives credence to the idea that Hebrew and the Old Testament or the Torah itself, at the very least, because the Shapira Scrolls and the Katef Hinnom amulet, right? They just have text from the Pentateuch, the first five books only, right? So at the very least, these first five books did exist prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls. We don't know much more at this point in time, right? And even when it comes to the Shapira Scroll, we don't necessarily know for a fact when they should be dated to. And probably a lot more research needs to be done, a lot more discovery needs to be done. These scrolls need to be rediscovered and so on, right? So yes, so a lot in here. I'm actually gonna stop here today. Do you think maybe we should ask the chat if you guys just put in a one if you want to continue, because it would be another hour, honestly, before I can stop for the
I would
yeah.
say okay, I would say that the information, it's a whole lot of information you gave. So I
Yeah,
think at that point, after you summarize, I think right now would be a good place to stop and actually just try to review and discuss and see if there's certain things that we want to go further deep into, because this all this mashallah beautiful work, by the way, it's a whole lot of information. So it's best that we just break it down and make it more simple for everyone to to understand and to remember.
yeah, I think let's actually have people come up, because there may be questions which would make it easier for people and audiences as well. Let's see what type of questions come up. Now, remember this, I am not a scholar on this matter at all. I have to say this, there's so much depth into this, and my understanding is really surface level, right? But there's a lot that is here, right? Let me see, I have to pin the link and then see. Let me do that. DeAndre or Ali, if you want to add anything, if you've got anything to, if there were any observations, let me know. Okay.
So yeah, real quick, it's just a little. I have a little question myself. So can you go and elaborate further on the manuscript that has been found that's dated to the 7th century BC? Because I think people would like to know more about that, and including myself.
Oh, you mean the Kataf Hinnom silver scroll amulets? Or are you talking about the Shapira scrolls? Let me actually bring it up on the screen. So we're talking about, there's two things that we talk about: the 7th century or the early 6th century Kataf Hinnom silver scrolls. So this is really just like uh, something which you would expect. How should I put it? It's like it's smaller than your cell phone, even, right? This was just crumpled up in an amulet, and it just has a few verses from the book of Numbers. So it's not really used as a source, right? More so, it's it gives credence to the fact that the Old Testament was there and the Torah was surviving around that time. So if we want to push it back, right, the fact that 7th century or early 6th century BCE, right, these documents, this type of a document or some sort of a document that contained this the book of Numbers existed, and somebody found it useful enough or sacred enough that they put together the verses from that document into an amulet and used it as a form of security, preservation, or whatever you want to use an amulet for. But essentially, it's it's a document which not necessarily is useful as a source per se. Right. This is an actual picture of that what we found, right? And the Hebrew text that you see in there, that that's on the right side that you can see. Let me actually bring it up. Sorry, I think I forgot. Yeah, so you see here on my screen, right? The one on the left is what they found, the actual writings. This is a sort of what a sort of photograph that they've taken, which allows them to read the text much more clearly. Okay, and this is a transcription of the text, because the you can see that the modern Hebrew alphabets that we're using today, they look like what we have on the rightmost column. Okay, but if you look at the document itself, right, or this photograph that they made, I don't think it's called a photograph, I'm forgetting what it's called, but essentially if you look here, the script is very different, and that's how they're able to identify that it has to be from earlier than a certain time period, and later than a particular time period, because that's the time when that script was being used, right? So for example, if let's say for people who are um, how should I put it, a good example of this would be, so for certain people, right, who are from the Indian subcontinent or uh, from Far East, let's say, right, it's very common to sort of transliterate. Oh, actually, let's take the transliteration of the Quran, right? We've got Quran being transliterated into the English text so that people who don't know or have the ability to speak Arabic can read the English text to come to a very approximate understanding of what's written out there, right? We do that with the Quran. We have this transliteration, but if you know how old this transliteration is, it's not very common. It doesn't go back too far into history. It's a very recent uh, phenomenon that this transliteration has been happening. So if somebody finds a document today where the Quran is transliterated into English, right, we would know it is from this these centuries. You cannot claim that it's going back all the way to the 13th century or the 14th century and so on, right? Another example is the Turks, right? The people of Turkey, they don't use the Arabic script. They use the uh, Latin slash English slash European script when they're uh, when they write even the Arabic Quran. Okay, so that only started happening post World War One. It didn't happen before that. So if you find a copy of the Quran in the Turkish language transliterated in there, that means that it can only be dated post World War One, end of World War One, to the modern times. You cannot date it back to before that. So that's how they're sort of coming to an approximation of where when this is for. Okay. The other interesting one as we were talking about, is the Shapira Scrolls. Now, again, this is right now, it's not accepted as canon. It's not accepted as a valid document right now. Okay, that's used as a source, but there's a lot of work being put in there to make sure that there's an understanding of what this document really means, and how uh, how to interpret what the findings actually are. Because a lot of what was understood that these Shapira scrolls were, that these were forgeries, that they should be ignored, that's being debunked by this team that Dr. Dershowitz is leading. And then it's very interesting how this is going about. All right. And again, for us, what was interesting in there is what we see here, right? That the textual variation here is very interesting, especially for someone who uh, has the belief that the text was changed. So, unlike the current sources, right, the third person view is not there. It's sort of more written in the first person format. Okay. It's also the absence of the yod he vav he, right, in the text, which is very revealing. Instead, the God, our God, is being used, and there are certain passages which are altogether missing. And sometimes those have significant implications on how the text should be understood. So it might very well mean that some of the text that is currently understood to be part of the Bible might actually have been just some um, explanation or interpolation by uh, early scribes, or a commentary which was understood to be part of the text by later scribes, and so on. Right. So yeah, so so a lot in here. I put the link up. Can you confirm that the link is, yes, Dawa Trucker, it is in the Paleo Hebrew. No, actually, not even the Paleo Hebrew. It's even older than that. What was it? I actually, let me see. Sorry. Yeah, in the Paleo Hebrew. And this is not the early, but the later Paleo Hebrew, right? As if you understand that. So what that means is the early script is more like the Egyptian script. The later Paleo Hebrew is somewhat different. And I'll actually bring it up on the screen because this might be an interesting thing to add to it. Let me stop the presentation. Let's see.
Okay, real quick. I think I may have missed it. Can you remind me again as far as the source house, the one back to the 6th, 7th century BC?
Ali,
Remind me again
Ali,
why
Ali,
unreliable.
Ali. It's very hard to understand what you're saying.
Like, give me a second.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is, so I've pinned the link. The link is available for both Muslims and non-Muslims to come up on the stage, have a talk, chat, and I am open to learning from you guys, as well as sort of open to having this discussion, because this is interesting. Has been an interesting research for me, and there's definitely a lot that is there that I want to have the discussion on. Right. Okay. Yeah, like I said, it's open to Muslims as well as Christians, Jews, and other people. Okay, so Paleo and modern Hebrew alphabets. So the Aleph, right, as we see in the um, modern Hebrew. Let me see if I can increase the size. All right. Okay. The pictograph that was used. Okay. Some pictographs that are used by Paleo Hebrew and so on. This is Paleo Hebrew, the later. Okay, let me actually find something much better because it doesn't tell so much. So again, sorry, this is the Paleo Hebrew pictograph. The early ones, I'm gonna try and find something. Give me 1 second, Akhwan. Do, do, do. Okay, so this would be interesting. Just to give people an idea about how languages evolve and they use characters from different. So Alif, right? The object ox head in the Egyptian, right? Hebrew, the letter Aleph, right? Phoenician, that was the symbol that they used. Early Greeks used this sort of a slanted P symbol. Roman used the A symbol, and so on. So a lot of these languages borrowed from the other languages, and so on. So when you're going through this, when you're going through this language study, and when you're doing this, right? Lexicography, as it's called, it allows you to understand um, what a period you can put a date to the period in which a language was being used, a certain particular characters or representation was being used within that language, and so on. Paul, can you just confirm or verify yourself? Just open the camera, wave to us, and then okay, he jumped off. Again, Muslim brothers are also welcome to come up, and we can have a conversation as well. Let me see if I have. So this is another interesting one. Let me share this tab. Right, you can see uh, the post and the after the Elijah draw of 850 BC, how the letters changed. Right, the Dan stele, the post drought stele, how the letters were being used. Now, again, writing style may be something because of the individual, but it's also a representative representation of what the society is using and understanding. So it's these are sort of indications that are used by the academics and scholars to determine and date some of these documents and so on. Okay, brother Neil, I'm bringing you up. Okay, assalamu alaikum, akhi. Assalamu alaikum. Do you want me to bring it up, or
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah? Yeah,
Yeah, can you
so
put it back again?
let me do that. Give me 1 second. All right, so this is sort of just showing how the language sort of evolves, and this gives people different ideas, or the scholars basically use the evolution of the language or how the characters are being written to determine the period from which the documents might or the witnesses might be from, right? So the Dan stele, for example, had these type of characters on it. The post-rot characters
Yeah,
for these alphabets, they're slightly different, not necessarily
not necessarily completely
very
different, but
different.
very
Yeah,
similar.
very similar, right? And so on. So this is just to sort of understand how this is happening. We were also talking about over time. This is over a much longer period, and right, the Aleph was represented by this Egyptian
by the
character
that
and
looks like the bull.
Phoenician. Exactly, exactly, and so on, right? So, and then later on, these were the letters being used. Roman equivalent were sort of this and so on. So these are sort of the different ways people were able to keep the language alive using different um, scripts, right? And a lot of this information is available online.
Yeah.
Okay. So, by the way, Akhi, did you get the opportunity to listen to the presentation?
Subhanallah, you know what? For some reason, I did not receive the notification, even though I did. No, I did
Yeah,
clicked on it to receive it, but it didn't. Maybe because I was busy on something else on YouTube, and then
I was
I.
actually late in putting that up as well, so it might be the reason. If you, because I didn't get around doing this until about almost 6 o'clock today, because of a few
Yeah,
reasons. But
I
yeah,
was
tell me about
basically I was about 40 minutes or so into once you were giving the presentation. So I guess I came somewhere in between halfway.
Oh, okay, no worries. You probably got the Shapira Scrolls and some of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And anyone who's interested in this, I would recommend three videos. The first two are on Brother Wassam's channel,
Yep.
Beyond Doubt Theology. Okay, it's these are very academic discussions, so uh, you do need to have some patience in sitting through it. There's a lot of information in there that is being discussed. The first one definitely is um, the interview with Dr. Aiden Dershowitz, who's leading this. What do you call it? The study of the Shapira Scroll, whatever documentation we have around the Shapira Scrolls. The other one is again Dr. Oh, let me see if I can pull that one up. Okay. Yeah, Doctor with Ross Nichols, right?
Yeah,
Who
I
talks
watched that
about the
one.
Shapira Scroll?
I watched that one.
That's more on the history of these scrolls, right? Da-da-da. Okay, so these two, okay, uh, Dr. Ross Nichols and with Dr. Aiden Dershowitz. Do uh, you do have a look into this, right? These two, and then Dr. Dershowitz has this sort of presentation of the Shapiro Scrolls and its findings on. It's a YouTube video of Dr. Dershowitz. I'll try to find it again and put a link up in the chat where he defends his position that he
Hmm.
holds on the Shapiro Scrolls against other leading academics and their criticism, essentially. So that's a very interesting discussion as well, because that's very revealing in what happens in the um, in the academic circles. Because you sort of behind the big names at times we forget that it's just human beings with their
Right.
ability to err and their ability to not give the most precise information. Okay, and their opinions. That's the other thing. All right. Anything else you would want to add? Okay.
No, Barakallahu Fik, I think you did a great presentation.
All right.
Um, it's concerning that that prayer basically that you mentioned. that was written on the amulet. Apparently,
Uh,
there is no clear date when this was basically written, because we know
yeah.
that the from 1000 to 150 BCE, we know that the Paleo Hebrew was used, and then it was replaced by the Aramaic, as far as I was reading.
Yeah. It's going to
And
come
so,
up uh,
mhm,
in the next section.
inshallah.
Inshallah, yes. Yeah, yeah. No, go continue, continue. Okay.
No, so I was saying, that basically what I'm trying to point out to this, basically we need to find out when exactly or so did the Hebrew people um, began basically uh, using this type of basically prayers or incantations
Hmm.
in order to basically to reach a conclusion to where most likely in within that period of time before the the Hebrew people made the switch from Paleo Hebrew into the Aramaic language,
Yeah.
which lasted for a good period of time. And I was interestingly, Brother Faisal also found out that the modern Hebrew that the Hebrew speaking people use nowadays, once again they made the switch from the Aramaic, which basically was really spoken, it was a lingua franca at one point
Yeah.
of time. Once the Hebrew people or the Israelites were taken into the Babylonian captivity, it is well known also that the Babylonians, subhanallah, there is actually a bowl of Babylonian Aramaic, and the writing is very interestingly, it resembles what the modern Hebrew, or should call it a modern standard Hebrew that the Jewish people
Hmm.
use today for their writing, or for their for their scripture. It's actually, there is a bowl of Babylonian Aramaic or Semitic Aramaic, which is it shows the evolution of the language. So it evolved from the original Proto-Hebrew, which is it came, or it was similar to the Egyptian script. Okay, because the hieroglyphics were not the only. There is actually documents that show that the actual ancient Egyptians, they did have, most likely probably within either from the Middle Kingdom or the later kingdom. And it's very interesting to know that they had this type of script as well, and most likely that's how the Hebrew people uh, adopted this type of writing system, until of course it was eventually dropped out and changed.
Yeah, that's that's interesting. The book I was reading also contained a segment on the evolution of languages and the evolution of written script as well. Because that's an important part of the study. Because when you're studying the Bible, the again we go back to the history of the Jews. The Jews weren't necessarily um, they weren't necessarily not uninfluenced by the other cultures around them. They adopted a
Ex-
lot of things from other cultures, the
exactly.
language, the script, the a lot of things, right? And
Yeah.
we see that throughout history repeating itself over and over again. The fact that they started with the earliest writings were sort of in Egyptian, right? Then they adopted other scripts, the Akkadic and other scripts that were
Yeah.
there, and so on, right?
Basically, yeah, they took a lot and were influenced a lot by the nations, by the different
Nations
Canaanite
around them.
nations that surrounded them, uh,
Yeah,
you know, after the Exodus.
yeah, exactly. And then even with the Greek, we've seen how influential Greek was and the Greek
Exactly.
history was, which we see very clearly in the early Christian times and so on.
Yeah.
MK, can you turn on your camera and verify yourself? MK, I need you to turn on your camera and verify yourself. MK, let's see what's happening. All right. So I don't think there's any other questions. Again, it's open to other brothers as well. If you have any questions, if you have anything you want to discuss, we can bring it up as well.
Brother Faisal,
Okay.
I have a question now
Yeah.
that it just came to my mind.
Mhm.
So maybe Ali is gone. Do we
Yeah.
know exactly or a close timeline when Prophet Moses basically, until when he lived with the children of Israel until his death?
Yeah. So that's interesting. That's let me actually bring it up
Because
because
because of what I read, Brother Faisal, that
yes,
if the Hebrew people, the children of Israel, began using the Paleo Hebrew from 1000 BCE, which is before the Common Era, until 150 of the Common Era, as the sources that I read, if it is accurate, then that means that there is still a huge gap, a disconnection from
yeah,
1000 BC until the time of Prophet Moses, which the Jews basically say that it's been at least
yeah.
about 3,000 years or so, or maybe
No, no,
2,000
no.
years or more. No,
3,000 years from us, but so the most commonly understood time is from our perspective, from the Muslims' perspective, is that he was most likely around the time of Ramses. That's the one who aligns most. Wallahu alam. At the end of the day, right? We don't know
hmm
exactly. We just feel the hints given in the Quran, right? The fact that Musa al Islam, he grew up, then he went to Madian, he stayed there for a time, like his contract was 8 years or 10 years, something around that, right? Then
right,
he came back. Okay, so adding all of that together, it makes sense that he got wahi or revelation around the same age as the Prophet, peace be upon him, 40 years, right?
right,
That's what a lot of scholars also believe, right? Then
right.
the fact that the Pharaoh lived 40 years, and when he came back to Egypt, right, the Pharaoh was still the
Was still alive,
Pharaoh
yeah,
there, right? Yeah,
yeah.
still alive. So when you put all the clues together and you put the information that we get from all of the work in history that has been done, it makes a lot of sense that the Pharaoh of Musa al-Islam was Ramses the second.
Right,
Okay, and they're able to Ramses the second, when you ask when you go and look up when he was around, right, they've been able to given the information we have for him, because he's got his statues and everything, and you can do carbon
right.
dating, you can do all of that on it, right? So Ramses the second is believed to have reigned from, this was a time when he was king, from
He belonged in the.
1279
So okay,
1279 to 1213 BCE. Okay, that's almost 66 years. You look at any of the other pharaohs, it's very difficult to actually fit the story of Musa al-Islam into that
hmm, very
from the
interesting.
Islamic perspective. Now, again, this is all uh, we we don't know exactly, right? Uh, Allah knows best, but this is sort of the clues that we can put together to arrive at some form of a conclusion.
So we can
Okay,
probably
this is
guess yes, or or somewhat likely that it's about maybe 2,500 years. So if there's 1,000, that means that there's 1,500 year disconnect from what is known of the when the Paleo Hebrew was being used before it was switched into the Aramaic. So there's at least a 1,500 gap that
Uh-huh.
it is basically still undiscovered, because
Yes,
then we
not a
can
thousand,
say.
not 1,500 gap. Let me actually bring this up. This is interesting. Let's take a look at this. Just going to Wikipedia, looking up Ramses II. This is what you see: reign 1279 to 1213 BC. Right. So we know
1279.
that Ramses was dead by the time um, Musa al Islam and the Israelites left Egypt.
Yeah.
All right. So most likely, what we are seeing, the 40 years in isolation, that would take it to the um, 11, 11 70s or something, right?
Hmm.
That 40 years of wandering that they had in the desert, right? So the Torah was revealed around that time,
Right.
okay? Because they were in the desert. Not sure if it's the Sinai or if it's in the
Right.
Arabian desert,
In
where
the
it is,
Arabian.
we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, again, wallahu alam. But it happened around that time, and so from that time, okay, there's the next important timeline that we have is the next important milestone that we have is the time when Dawood al-Islam became the king of the nation, the of Israel, right? So
Right.
if you look at King David, okay, King David. So a lot of the biblical scholars actually put him around the 1025 or so BCE. All right. So there's this 150 years between the time before Dawud al-Islam comes and this time. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
So remember, Dawud al-Islam has the revelation as well,
Right.
the Zabur, and th- in all honesty, the Zabur wasn't that big of a book, right? It was a short book. It wasn't a lot of uh, a lot like the Torah is, right? But then post Dawud al-Islam, Sulaiman al-Islam, around 930 BCE, that's the time when things start going south, right?
Southwards. Yeah.
After Sulaiman al-Islam, the next few kings and the leaders who came in, we don't know who they are. In the Quran, we don't, none of them are named, so we
Yeah.
don't know if any of them stayed on the true path. From the biblical history, we know that these people were a lot of the kings that came in later were idolaters, right? They introduced idols and
Right.
worship of idols again, right? So all of that is happening now. Again, at the same time, the other things that are happening is the 8th century. We're seeing a different sort of script being used. Okay, and we're seeing all of these changes. So these are the sort of clues that they're putting together. So when I look at this, I'm not going to say that it's the work that they're doing is complete waste per se, but at the end of the day, they're it's almost impossible to get to an original script. Okay, and without the guidance that we have from the Quran, we wouldn't really be able to get to the conclusions that we have today, right? We would have been misguided just like them, because
Right.
they've put a lot of work in there. When you look at the scholarly aspect of it, they've put a lot of work. They've put tens of thousands of hours in putting all of this together. And unfortunately, I mean, the work that had to be done by the earliest generations. And subhanallah, it's only the Muslims who, where the earliest generations actually did the work that they needed to do.
Because you see, what I was thinking about this issue of the Paleo Hebrew and the time that is dated of its use,
Hmm.
I mean, it is well known that the majority of the Israelites, of the children of Israel, the descendants of the 12 tribes, we know that the majority of them, just like in the period of the of the time of Jesus, alayhi salam, Prophet Jesus, alayhi salam, we know that the majority of the people, they were illiterate, and we know that during the time of the revelation, when Prophet Musa alayhi salam received the revelation until after the crossing of the sea, and the 40-year period that they spent on the desert, we know that the majority of the people, they were illiterate. The illiteracy rate, it was high at that time. So you know I believe that historically, maybe what the historians date, there might be some sort of clash of the dating system, because it is impossible that they began using Paleo Hebrew as a writing system when perhaps maybe the only one, and we do not know with certainty whether Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he knew how to write the Egyptian script at that time, and there is no evidence. There's no, I mean, except for the Shapira scroll, which it is believed that it might have been written by Prophet Moses, because I mean, as you were saying, and from the videos of the interview of that scholar,
Yeah,
it talks in the singular person. It
yeah,
talks in the
but
singular person. Yeah,
it's not necessarily that it would have been written by Musa alayhi salam. It's more likely it's just the fact that it's written differently that is telling, right? So, brother Neil, when it comes to this, right, the fact that it is so different from what we see in the Old Testament today, that's actually the biggest reason why a lot of the academics are refusing to accept the Shapira scroll as a valid source of Old Testament uh, uh, um, an ancient source of the Old Testament document, that it's written so differently. But that is what Dr. Dershowitz had been talking about in his book and in his thesis and in dissertation that dissertation, that it's different. That's why we need to look at it and study it and see this as a valid source, because it goes 500 years further back from everything that we have. And if
hmm,
it is from that time, we need to take it seriously that the Old Testament as we have it today was very different from the Old Testament that was being read by the ancient Israelites,
right,
right? And that's what's telling. And from my perspective, this is still, even if it goes back to 800 BCE, it's still about 300 or 400 years from the time of when the actual Torah was revealed,
right,
right? So what could happen in 400 years? We've seen the 500 years. We've seen the time from then to Isa alayhi salam. We've seen, like, it's just there's a lot of changes happening in the document, right?
exactly, exactly. And especially now, what's coming to my mind right now, to memory, is that when the Israelites were taken into captivity into Babylon for at least 50 years or so.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, it is well known by the rabbis and historians that, of course, when it comes to the issue of rewriting the Tanakh, okay, what they claim to call the Torah, which is we know it's not,
Hmm.
and what is falsely attributed to to Prophet Moses alayhi salam. We know that, I mean, they know that Ezra is the one who rewrote according to their classical
Yeah.
sources. The priest Ezra is the one who rewrote the Torah in Babylon, So it is. So the the heavy influence of the
Not in
language of that,
Babylon,
yes,
not in Babylon, but in Persia. So by that time, the Persians, and then the Greeks. The Babylonian era was before they were when they were expelled, right? The Babylonian era was when they were expelled. This is going back to
right,
sixth century, and Ezra is like the um, fifth century. Okay, so Ezra is around the time of the late Persian and just before the um, Greeks.
yeah. But I mean, by that time, I mean, what did the Persian language look like?
Yeah.
If indeed it happened in this issue of the books that they have, being rewritten again, by Ezra. That's a question that comes to my mind. What did the Persian script look like? And if it was really written in that period of time, during the Persian period, then there must be evidence, scriptural evidence to show that indeed it was written in that language.
Mhm.
This is the
Yeah.
what I, you know
So I'll look it up, but there's definitely these people do study that. They do study. They do identify when they expect something to have started and when sort of the script fell out of use and so on, right?
right,
So those type of that type of work has already been done, but again, this is like opening another can of worms. There's so much in there. At the end of the day, what we need to understand is that these impacts what we have right now, and plus like uh, the other things that impact this, because there's a lot of discussion that can still be had on these matters, because we also have the concept of progressive revelation, right? Yes, the Torah was corrupted, but then the prophets came after that, Dawood al-Islam, Sulaiman al-Islam, right? I don't think that the wrong Torah was being used at that point in time. Something must have been corrected. There would have been something
correct,
done, okay, to bring it back. Then what happened after that? Don't know. And then I think the next major prophet after Dawood al-Islam and Sulaiman al-Islam, the major prophet who came with the revelation is Isa al-Islam. Okay, and that's the one that when they found him, that he's telling us that this is not from the Torah, right? He's correcting them. What did they try to do? They tried to get him executed. Okay, so by that time, the Torah was different enough that Isa al-Islam's statements and corrections
right.
were um, gave these leading Jews enough justification to try to move politically against him, right? So those are very interesting concepts and theories that we need to keep in mind. Okay, I don't know who this MK guy is. So he came on and he tried to uh, sneak in uh, the live stream on his channels. I mean, this is completely inappropriate. MK, if you are hearing this, I would recommend that you have a chat with us separately. And I don't appreciate you coming in and sniping on our streams, right? So that's completely inappropriate. All right. So I'll be honest, I don't have too much time today because I have a
Hmm.
early morning discussion that appointment that I have actually during before Fajr prayer with someone that I need to go to. So we're probably gonna stream for another 30 minutes or so. So if any other Muslim brothers, sisters, you guys want to jump on and add your observations, comments, or criticism, or question us on what we've presented so far, just let us know. But I think hopefully this would be, this would be useful for Muslims to understand what we're dealing with. Like, it's not as simple as Christians just saying and coming to us and saying, "Oh, the Old Testament is we have the Old Testament," right? It's
Huh.
not as simple as that. The Old Testament is not the Torah, right? The and we'll see the next section. We'll actually see how many different documents there are, right? And then you can start questioning, okay, which what are we talking about here? And it will become more and more interesting because first we're sort of trying to just understand what documents, what sources there are. The next step will sort of look at what are the different fields of studies that they have and dive into the textual criticism, how they come up with, what are the rules that they're using to come up with the uh, text that they present to us as the Old Testament. All right. And I'm not saying that they don't have, they've not done good work on trying to come together. There's definitely some form of a science involved in there, but it's also a lot of art in there, which just doesn't make any sense. Right.
Right.
It's just conjecture.
Yes, it
Exactly.
is. And you would realize how fitting the description that the Quran has given is to um, this sort of work that is being done, right? Because there's just so much in there that can only be defined as
As
conjecture.
conjecture.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Because there's no certainty. They cannot establish with certainty. I mean, several things. I mean, there's or many things, you know.
Yeah. And and the reason why I've actually taken so much time to go over these sources is because when we get to the part where we're talking about this type of criticism, or even in our other streams, when we start bringing up, oh, this is in the Peshitta, this is in the Samaritan Pentateuch, this is from the Septuagint, and so on. Like we have on the um, other stream we do with the Tanakh stream that we do with Brother Yemeni, right? This would start becoming more and more critical for us to use this knowledge that we're getting from here and apply it and understand what we're talking about in those type of streams, because these we as Muslims we don't come across these terms, right? And Christians and Jews, they sort of exploit that uh, our lack of uh, knowledge on this particular aspect. Now remember this, that when we're talking about the Old Testament that they're currently using, when is it put together? It's between the 6th century CE to the 10th century CE. That's the earliest work that has been. That's the work that has been done. The Hebrew Bible that we have today, right, which is what is taken as the de facto standard,
Mm-hmm.
is coming from the Masoretic text. The earliest of which we have, the earliest complete manuscript of the Masoretic text that we had was the Aleppo. The full complete manuscript that is surviving today is the Leningrad one, right? But these are the two that are considered as sort of canonical. Now, even in that, it's important for us to understand that these two texts are not necessarily exactly the same.
They
There's
variate.
differences between them because one group of Jews came up with this one text, another group came up with the second text, right? And they had their differences. So, what did they include in the margin versus what did they include in the text versus what commentaries they have, what information they have? That's all there. Right? There's textual criticism in that as well. Now, you only get into this and see all of this information when you start diving into the textual criticism piece, right? Which is sort of a beast. People are spending their life, they're spending their life trying to do this work. And we're just scratching the surface. How much more there is in depth is just unbelievable. We're just scratching the surface. We're just trying to make sure that our audiences and the Muslim audiences, as on the large, right, they understand what it is we're dealing with. Because what I've seen a lot happen is people come and present this historical critical method and all of this as some sort of uh, proof against the Quran, against and the proof of the Bible, and sort of and so on. But when Muslims start understanding this, you would realize this is just smoke and mirrors. They're
Hmm.
just using big words to sort of hide the fact that they, at the end of the day, they have nothing, right? Because
Subhanallah.
what are we trying to do? We're trying to get to the original text. What was written in the Torah when Musa alayhis salam got it, right? That's what the goal is. Can they reach that goal? Impossible. They don't have the original Torah. Okay, maybe the original Torah might be discovered later on, but we know that, and I think there is probably some prophecy, right, that the Ark of the Covenant might be discovered. I don't know if is it a uh, I'm not sure if it's the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam who said anything like that, but regardless, if it is discovered, what will be written on it? It's definitely not going to be what's in the Bible today.
No.
Okay, there may be some glimpses of what's written on there from the Bible, but
It
what's going to be exactly on it, we don't know.
is very interesting because I mean we have to base this judgment based on what we have of the Quran because it is the criterion in order to
Yeah,
judge what they have. Eventually, if they end up finding something closer to it, we will use the Quran as the basis for
yeah,
judgments and
exactly.
decisions. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, imagine because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Musa alayhi salam, I think this is in Surah Taha, where Allah mentions the plural word of al-wah, that Allah gave Prophet Musa al-wah, the tablets.
yeah,
So it's not only one, but it's probably a series of multiple tablets in which was the original revelation was revealed, and we do not know. And Allahu alam, subhanallah, how this may look,
yeah,
but the Quran affirms it, of course, and most likely, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to al-kitab, it is probably referring to the actual Torah itself. That most likely you know, was basically deduced from the al-wah, from the original tablets.
yeah. So especially when it's referring to Al-Kitab in the context that we gave Musa Al-Kitab, right? Or
Naam,
in that sense, right? That's specifically referring to the Torah. It's not
the
referring
book form.
to the yeah. It's not referring to what we have today as the Old Testament or anything
Of
like
course
that.
not. Of course not.
It's
It
not.
is a completely
Yeah,
different book
and
with a
and
complete
the Quran
different relation. Naam, similar to the Quran.
and the Quran contextualizes it, and basically it makes sure that you're not misunderstanding it to be the books that they have, right?
No, no,
Because the
absolutely
Quran
not.
talks about it as the Torah that was the a kitab that was revealed to Moses, and we gave the kitab to Moses, right? And that's essentially how it is. So when in other places, it's very clear in like the book that they have, right? The books that they have is not necessarily it's not the book that was revealed to Musa alayhis salam. So
Sahih.
yeah, so if the Quran uses the term Torah for something that the Jews call the Torah, that's contextually valid. And at the same time, when the
Mm,
Quran is specifically terming the revelation as the Torah, which was revealed to Musa alayhis salam, it's contextually valid as well. And the two are not the same, because putting the two in context and in the verse that when you see it, It makes it very clear what those
Meaning,
two differences are. Yeah.
when you okay, so when you mean contextually,
Yep.
putting both together, you're referring to the original revelation, the Torah,
Yes.
versus what the Jews have in their possession today of what they claim to be the Torah.
Yes.
Correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Because linguistically, it's uh, it's been used correctly, right? And it may not be referring to the same thing. That's the point, right? So
But
this is even more proof when you go through this history. This is even more proof that when you talk about the Torah at the time of Musa alayhi salam, that's not the same as the Torah at the time of Ezra or Israel,
or any other
Ezekiel or
prophet.
any of the other prophets, right? So so this is because they keep changing it. Like we're looking at older scrolls which were which we're finding from the Shapira Scrolls, as we were just talking about it, right, from the 8th century BCE, and those are written in first person. Okay,
Hmm.
and there's some pieces in those scrolls which are missing completely. So did they get added later on? Why did they get added later on? We don't even know why those were added later on. Okay, but somebody, this just definitely showed that somebody keeps changing the document. And we talked about, and I also mentioned the Sophron, right? How from the time of Ezra to the time of Isa alayhis salam, right? The scribes who were responsible for preserving the Torah and Hebrew Bible, right? They changed the documents that were there. They they were being liberal with what they had. Now, why they're doing that? Because there could be reasons for doing it. Just for example, you're making a change to make it easier for the current people to understand, right? Like when we're looking at the translations of the Quran, right? Before we used to have Marmaduke Pictol.
Right.
If somebody picks it up today, I'm guaranteeing the Gen Zs and Gen A, they will find it almost impossible to read that translation of the Quran because it's very precise. It's one of the most precise translation because of how closely how literal it is to the meaning of the text, right? But at the same time, it's almost impossible for the newer generation to read that. And then you go to uh, the Clear Quran or some of the newer ones that are coming out. Those are very easy to understand, but they sort of give up or they make a trade-off on the meaning side
Right.
just to make it easier for people to read, right? So there's always a trade-off with all of that. So these people, they were adding to the text, languages were changing. Hebrew was no longer a very common language as it used to be, right? Aramaic was around the 4th century BCE. Aramaic started becoming more widespread. Then Greek started creeping into the Jewish, and we'll see it as we go through this, right? Plus, at the same time, right, there's this competing group of people, a whole different group, the Samaritans, who exist from the time of the Babylonians all the way to today because they came up with the Pentateuch. And these people, are they Jews? Are they not Jews? It's debated, right? A lot of people believe that they were sort of mixed race, sort of speaking, that the Assyrians, sorry, it was not the time of Babylons, but it was the time of the Assyrians. The Assyrians, because they displaced the original settlements of the Jews from the northern
Right.
regions that they conquered, right? Those were dispersed in all of the Assyrian lands, okay? And they brought people from other places into that land. But these people sort of took on the Jewish traditions, they took on um,
Right. They assimilated.
their assimilated with the Jews, right? And then they considered themselves the true Jews. And the Jews of the kingdom of Judah as the false Jews. And we've got the strife between the Samaritans and the Jews that you find in the Bible, where at times they're the sort of this frenemies type relationship that you would have, where sometimes they're with the Jews, like in the building of the temple, they were part of it, but at other times they're arguing with the Jews, fighting with the Jews, competing with Jews, right? That this is what it is. And the Bible itself is a sort of a Jewish text, and it holds their history of how their interaction goes. So that's another interesting aspect to it. Now, what does that all show us? When it comes to history, yes, it gives us a lot of information about history, right? But when it comes to the revelation, there's only so much more that you can add there. There's not really anything concrete from the Samaritans. I mean, they didn't have a clear tradition of how they were preserving the Torah, because the Samaritans don't believe in anything other than the Torah. Right? For them, everything else is not part of the scripture. So yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah, and we'll come across this, because this is going to be the interesting part, because that's where we would start seeing the Hebrew part was a part where we saw that, okay, the text is either preserved, not preserved, post 6th century BC, post 6th century CE, modern era, right? We have a lot of effort going into preserve the Hebrew text, and since that preservation effort was put together, there's way little changes to the Hebrew text. But pre before that time, what's happening? So many questions, so
Right.
many questions. All right, I don't think anyone else is going to jump on. I'm I'm actually going to wrap this up if Ali does not come in. Brother DeAndre. So
Yeah.
uh, um, maybe Ali might jump on in a few minutes. I'll stick around 15 more minutes. Let's give him 15 more minutes, because then
Yeah.
like I said, I have to sleep.
What did Ali go to
You
do?
guys want to? Oh, we need an admin.
You got the
Right.
Andre.
So I don't know if DeAndre, if you're able to be included as an admin or not.
What do you mean if I'm able to be? You just have to add me to
Would you
to
be
admin.
No, but would you be able to like, because you don't get, I don't know if you will get notifications or anything at all if somebody's jumping in the backstage, because we see them, right? And we
I
know
think it does
who so
notify me.
far.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay, but how would you bring them up? So anyway, we'll talk about this a bit
Yeah, yeah,
later,
yeah, inshallah.
Yeah, yeah, no
because
problem.
we also have to see if the functionality is there in StreamYard.
Yeah, pretty
Because
much.
I don't know if we have the uh, capability to add admins, but we'll see.
Yeah, I would have to go on computer and kind of like test it out as well. So we'll
Yeah.
figure that out, inshallah. Soon.
DeAndre, every
All
time
right.
you speak, you give me the impression that you can see my bro. Barakallahu fik.
Assalamu alaikum, bro. Champ. How are you doing? How is my nephew?
Ooh,
Champ,
Champ.
hello, are you there? Houston, do you copy?
I don't know. Let's see. Let's give him a moment. Oh, Mike's out. Do you want to just uh, try reconnecting? You can jump off and then jump back on.
You know what? What just came to my mind? The beautiful thing about the Quran
Mhm.
concerning, you know, Musa. I mean, Yaqub alayhi salam. You know, that his 12 children, and their descendants and Bani Israel.
Hmm.
It's very interesting that the Quran basically has already outlined for us the history of Bani Israel without the necessity to add any dates.
Hmm. Yeah, and we don't need that, right? The lessons from their history is more important than what happened in their history per se. One of the other things, brother Neil, that I want us Muslims to appreciate, and this is again, I mean, the fact that we say radiyallahu anhu wa radwan, because radiyallahu anha, right? Because of that
Hmm.
statement in the Quran, radiyallahu anhu wa radwan,
No,
right?
no,
So subhanallah, like the just this idea, that those that uh generation, those few generations that followed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and
sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
like the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, the Taba Tabi'in, right? Those earliest generations that we have. The fact that they put the Quran in writing for us, that they made sure we were understanding it, right? That this was passed on as a tradition, that we didn't repeat these mistakes
Of the
uh,
Christians and the Jews.
of the Christians and Jews, right? Only those people could have done that. And Alhamdulillah, like Subhanallah, this is an inspiration from Allah, right? But these are the ones who were chosen by Allah, and these are the ones who acted on them, right? So this,
Subhanallah.
in of itself, is such an amazing gift to the Muslims, to all of the Muslims who would come till the end of time, right? Because this is like the the fact that they took that initiative, that fact that um, they did that, they performed that action, right, is such a blessings from Allah on us Muslims, that we don't even know how much we should be thankful for. Because all of this confusion that
Subhanallah.
these Christians have, like, think about it. These Christians, they're spending billions and billions of dollars on this biblical studies. I'm bringing you back up, Akhi. Can you try speaking?
He said he was gonna get his headset.
Yeah, I think he
عليكم
did, but
ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I can hear you. Yeah, but it's too low.
Walaikum
Can you
salam
try
wa
speaking
barakatuh.
again?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Very
Walaikum
loud.
assalam wa
Walaikum
rahmatullah.
salam
Yeah.
wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
You
Yeah.
were asking earlier how your nephew was doing. Your nephew is doing good, alhamdulillah. كيف حالك?
Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
الحمد
Alhamdulillah.
لله.
So
Alhamdulillah.
yeah,
Oh, by the way,
just
I want to make a correction on you. You said that there was no blood relation between us. That's wrong. You're a son of Adam. No.
oh, okay. Okay.
I guess we all are related,
Yeah.
alhamdulillah.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Anyway,
Adam
so
alayhi
just to
salam.
complete that thought, right? That that's the first one. Okay. And the second one is preserving the sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And that the third generation after the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, pretty much, because most of the like Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim and all of them, they're from the third and the fourth generation after the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? So the fact that they not only did they put that they took the time to put everything down for us, they came up with this completely new method of proving whether something is true or whether something is not true from an oral tradition and from written traditions and all of that we had, and to verify the sunnah for us, right? That's such an amazing gift. Again, like we don't even know how much effort we would have had to put in to uh, do this. Like this, these people are spending billions
Right.
in trying to do what? In trying to do what? Something that we take for granted. We Muslims, we take it for granted.
Yeah.
they don't have their Quran in one place. They don't even know what goes in their Quran, right? In their Torah, in their Zabur, they don't even know that, right? So
SubhanAllah.
this is again for Muslims brothers and sisters.
It is a big
We
blessing,
need to,
wallahi.
yeah, we need to reflect on it, and this is it. This presentation, inshallah, is going to help you guys appreciate that effort that has been put in, right?
Alhamdulillah. Then that should be the, I guess, I don't know if I should say it, our moral objective, but our
Yeah.
main
So
objective.
yeah,
I understand your point, subhanallah,
yeah,
because you, by presenting all of this to us, it should really make us start thinking and
exactly.
appreciating that, yeah, in reality, that the wallahi, the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them all, those who were the scribes of the Quran, who wrote it down, who were literate enough or in the Arabic language. I mean, subhanallah, it is indeed a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this tradition was brought to us.
Yeah,
First,
exactly.
it came from an oral tradition which the Prophet recited, but then, of course, those who right there at the moment, those who knew how to write the Arabic or were eloquent in the Arabic, they wrote it down to
Yeah,
preserve it, subhanallah, in the various forms until it became a book form.
yeah. And then it was compiled into a book form, because uh, we do need to understand this, that the when the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, and especially in Medina, I'm not sure about the times in Makkah, if and when and how it was happening, but definitely in Medina, he had official scribes. He had official scribes, right? There were
Subhanallah.
people like Ali radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Zaid bin Thabit, and there's so many scribes of the Prophet ﷺ, 50 plus, right? Who, some of whom were always with him, around him, with the ink and the parchment or some sort of thing to write the Quran down on, right? And it was a habit of the Prophet ﷺ to repeat it,
Subhanallah.
and have them repeat it to him afterwards to make sure that this is all valid and so on, right? That there's no mistakes in there. So
Subhan-
so
you-
what we have in
Subhanallah.
our tradition is almost unparalleled. There's nothing like
Yeah,
that in
yeah,
history.
yeah, yeah. I mean, even though that we know that the Quran was, was began to be written in the Meccan time, in the Meccan period itself.
Yeah.
We know from the story of Omar radiallahu anhu when
Umar
he's,
radiallahu anhu,
his
yes.
sister, his sister, Zainab bin al-Khattab, and her husband and another companion, we know that they had the, Surah Taha in written down, and Omar read it. That was the cause for him to become a Muslim. Subhanallah.
Yeah.
So,
Subhanallah. Yeah,
it,
exactly. So 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 we have very old traditions. Quran only debater. Oh,
boy, it's gonna be a long.
He said,
A
ugh.
hadith, a hadith redactor.
I do need to verify
Yes,
him. Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Quran
I don't.
alone, Quran alone.
Yeah,
God,
I'll be
these guys
honest.
are gonna be a waste of
I'll be
time.
honest. If Ali comes up, then fine. But like for me, it's getting late.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do have.
Oh,
I,
by
I
the way,
say
you
I
said
say the same.
I
Yeah.
agree. I
It's not that we're
concur.
trying to run away. It's just that I'm tired. It's 10:38 at night here. I have to
Oh,
go to sleep too.
Yes.
I forfeit that. I forfeit that. It's really early in the morning. I'm not ready for wafflers.
All right.
Quran only heretic. If Ali comes up, we'll let you on, Mr. Heretic. And if he doesn't, then unfortunately you have to go.
Bye
The
bye.
Quran tells you to follow and obey the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam
Sallallahu
in
alayhi
over
wasallam.
and over 100 different places.
Brain rejector.
Bring it. Yo, Neil, that reminds me of when there was this guy on Ramzi's chat who's backstage. He was called Quranist. And Ramzi called him Satanist.
When
Yeah.
was that?
Anyway, like,
On the
do you
stream.
guys want to bring him up? We'll give him like 10
Mm,
minutes if you want to.
Honestly, I don't want to waste my breath.
I don't, I
Fine.
don't, I don't,
Let's.
I don't talk to kuffar.
Yeah. Anyway, Ahwan, let's wrap it up then, because I know there's going to be a lot more in the next presentation. Inshallah, we'll continue this presentation. There's going to be a lot more that we'll go through. I'll try to recap what we've done so far, just so people are up to date on as we move along in this presentation, because this sort of all comes around and p- allows you to come to the conclusions that we'll try to come to, right? As long as you're uh, keeping up
Yep.
with this, all right?
Look
Okay.
at
But
him. Look
Where
at
is
him.
brother
He's doing.
Fawad?
This guy is doing ad hominems already in the chat. Well, first of all,
sure, no worries.
you came to the wrong string, buddy. This is about the Old Testament, not
Yeah.
about the Quran. So you're wasting your breath, buddy. Bye bye.
All right. Let's leave him in the back chat. I mean, it's gonna be
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Just
Watch. He's
reading
he's
the
gonna
text.
clip.
Funny.
He's gonna make a clip out of this moment minutes. You know, since the moment he came on board on the back chat, and he's gonna
Yeah.
say, "Oh, look at them running away." Watch.
Funny.
Trust me.
All right.
Anyways, where is brother Fawad?
Okay.
Hey, where's
We'll see.
Fawad?
He's taking a break for a while. But I haven't
May
heard
Allah
back
bless
from
him and
him
his
since he
family.
said yes. Yeah, may Allah bless him. Make dua for him. Okay.
May Allah
The
help
All
him.
right.
May Allah
I
protect
mean,
him.
I
May
mean,
Allah
I mean,
forgive him.
I mean, all
I
of us.
mean, yes.
And may Allah bless us, the ummah. And may Allah forgive the ummah.
I mean, I mean.
I mean.
Inshallah,
All
brother
right,
Faisal.
brother. Champ, do you have any questions on the presentation today or any observations on it?
To be honest, I wasn't paying attention.
Seriously, you're making me sound like as if I'm Ali.
Like you wasted your time.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh, where's Ali? Ali didn't hear that, I hope. Okay, okay. Anyway, uh, so anyway, let's call it a night. I know it's a short stream, but I think Ali is stuck somewhere. He's not able to come to his StreamYard, and I have an appointment early morning, so I need to be going. So inshallah, we'll wrap up. So jazakallah khair, Akhwan, for joining us, brother Neil and brother Temp. Do you have anything to add?
No, Jazakallah khairan.
Yes. May Allah bless you, Uncle Faisal.
Jazakallah khair, akhi.
Wa
Make dua for
jazakum.
all of us. Yeah.
I mean,
And may
and
Allah allow us to do Hajj.
Allahumma
Ameen.
ameen.
Ameen. And
Inshallah.
and just
Even though
yeah, go ahead, akhi.
even though it was a short stream, 2.5 hours, I really appreciate the time. Ali wanted me to be here, so I came. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are we streaming tomorrow or again or no?
Um, to be honest, I have to confirm with Ali right now, because if is Ramzi streaming tomorrow or no?
I have no idea. He
I
hasn't
know
come
Oh,
out.
actually, I
Okay.
do have a comment on the presentation. It
Yeah,
was
go ahead.
really well put. It was really well put together there, and I think you had a very valid criticism of the Old Testament's preservation. May Allah bless you for your efforts.
Yeah.
Allahumma ameen.
And here's the thing, Champ. It's not yet a criticism. It's just a presentation of what the facts are, right?
Oh, the
We'll
analysis.
talk about the criticism after we've seen all of the facts, because there's just like so many things. It's like somebody coming up and presenting rags to a king and saying, "Here is the here's the latest, most fashionable, kingly clothes that we can provide
Suit of
you."
armor, yeah. Or
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Because that's literally what these people are doing. They're giving junk to people and claiming that this is scripture. This is from the Almighty. Nauzubillah. Right?
Or-
Subhanallah.
Because
This is
yes,
Allah.
there's
Allah
beautiful
says
how
in the
Allah.
Quran, "Woe to those who write the scripture with their own hands and then say this is from Allah."
Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of those. And another verse that Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, and the Jews, they say to the Christians that they are upon nothing. And the
Yeah.
Christians say to the Jews, they are upon nothing.
And they
Still,
both
yet they read the same book.
same book. And you know the previous verse, Brother Dawataker, when Allah talks about this, that they write the scripture with their own hand, and they claim it
Yeah.
is from Allah, and the other one where Allah talks about that, do it for just a small change, right?
Nom, nom,
That's
nom.
why they do it. So when you look at even the current textual critical method and all of the work that they're doing, in all of it, what do they present you? They present you a book and they claim this is from Allah.
Exactly. Exactly.
And why are they doing that? Why are these people in this doing this work? Right? They're
It,
writing this Old Testament with their own hand. They're deciding, oh, this book, I'll take this from here, and we'll come to that, right? These two ayahs, like this explains this whole method perfectly, right? And it will fit. Inshallah, we'll see it as well. So, Akhwan,
inshallah.
yes, Jazakallah khair for jumping on, Brother Neil, Brother Champ, right? A lot of what is going to be presented is just going to be a lot of information for now, and then we'll get into the juicy part when we come to the last segment of this whole thing, where we're going to bring all of this together and sort of come to our conclusions on why this doesn't make sense as Muslims. When we compare to what we have, it does not make any sense whatsoever to rely on these methods or to
Right.
give a lot of credence to these methods. All right.
Yes,
All right, Akhwan.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. As usual,
All right.
make dua for our brothers and sisters in
Palestine.
around the
Yeah.
world, in Palestine, in Lebanon, Syria,
In
Sudan,
Yemen,
Yemen,
I mean. I mean.
to
I mean,
in
Tajikistan,
Kyrgyzstan.
Inshallah.
I'm
no,
not sure what's happening there.
Tajikistan.
You're
Like
saying
the
Kazakhstan?
country, the country that banned the hijab and beard.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know
okay.
what you're referring to.
Yes.
Turkmenistan.
So Turkmenistan, yes. So yes,
oh, Turkmenistan. Okay.
let's make dua, and as usual, this
May
is
Allah
tough times
grant
for
our
Muslims.
martyrs and
Yeah.
I
may
mean,
Allah grant our martyrs in Palestine Jannat al-Firdaus.
Ameen.
Allahumma
Ameen.
ameen. Inshallah, Brother Faisal, then. Jazakallah khair once again. And it'll be a pleasure to join you again tomorrow, Bismillah. And all I have
Inshallah.
to say is,
Inshallah.
Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa
Assalam.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa
Assalamu
rahmatullahi wa
alaikum
barakatuh.
wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.